Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Books and Bytes, where we take a deep dive into Sir Richard J. Evans' monumental work, The Third Reich at War, 1939-1945. Today, we're embarking on a journey through the harrowing years of World War II, really seeing it from the perspective of the Third Reich. This isn't just about battles and dates, it's a profound exploration of how an entire nation was mobilized for war. We're talking about the ideologies that drove unspeakable atrocities and the internal dynamics of a regime that, clung to its destructive vision, even as it started to crumble. Our mission today is to trace that whole arc, the entire story of the war years, through Evans' incredibly detailed research, from those first lightning strikes right through to the bitter end. We want to distill the most important insights for you.
Exactly. And Evans covers so much ground. We'll be looking at the famous Blitzkrieg, of course, but also the horrifying realities of occupation, the systematic genocide that unfolded, the immense pressures on the German home front, and then finally the devastating collapse. What Evans really shows is how deeply intertwined everything was: military strategy, political fanaticism, and just profound human suffering. So what you'll hear today are the key insights and, frankly, some striking details that Evans brings to life. It gives you a concise but really deep understanding of this critical period.
Okay, let's dive in. We should probably start right at the beginning, September 1939, the invasion of Poland, and so started what Hitler called Blitzkrieg. Evans paints this picture of a war of really rapid movement, tanks, motorized divisions, and terrifying bomber attacks, all designed to just overwhelm the enemy with speed and force.
And the results were, well, stark. Right away, you see the incredibly unequal nature of the fight. Polish losses were just immense. Tens of thousands killed, hundreds of thousands taken prisoner by both Germans and Soviets, who also invaded. German forces, though victorious, didn't escape unscathed either. They suffered, non-negligible losses, thousands killed, tens of thousands wounded, and significant equipment destruction, too. It shows the intensity, even in those early days.
And beyond the battlefield, the brutality in Poland was immediate. It was shocking. Evans gives these awful examples, like a stormtrooper leader in one town, Hohensalza, who personally shot dozens of Polish prisoners, and another incident in No Blues where SS men beat and then shot 10 Polish schoolboys because they wouldn't name someone. They just left their bodies there for a whole day as a grim warning.
Yeah, and this wasn't isolated stuff. From September 39 onwards, you had these special units, the SS Einsatzgruppen, basically mobile killing squads plus police units, ethnic German paramilitaries, even regular German soldiers, systematically killing civilians all across occupied Poland.
It was also about resources, wasn't it? Right from the get-go.
Absolutely. The Reich immediately demanded hundreds of thousands of Polish workers for Germany's economy, mostly for farms. Now, some Poles did initially volunteer, maybe because things were so bad at home, but the treatment they got in Germany was brutal. So that voluntary aspect quickly dried up and it became widespread forced conscription, which in turn actually helped spur the beginnings of the Polish underground resistance.
And alongside that, you had these early attempts at Germanization, forcing Polish residents onto German ethnic lists, trying to erase their identity. Evans notes many bravely rejected this.
And of course, the anti-Jewish measures, they started almost instantly in Poland.
Right. In towns like Zamość, you hear about German troops looting Jewish shops and homes, forcing Jews into humiliating acts like cleaning streets, doing exhausting exercises. Synagogues were burned. And by December 1939, Jews aged 10 and over had to wear that yellow star. They were even barred from getting medical help from non-Jewish doctors. Evans mentions a Dr. Kolakowski's diary, expressing such anguish over this, feeling helpless.
What's really telling, though, is that even within the German military establishment, some people saw the danger in this extreme brutality. General Johannes Blaskowitz actually protested to Hitler. He argued that the SS's cuff measures were basically needlessly endangering military security and economic life because they were just driving Poles and Jews together against the Germans.
Yeah, and Hitler's reaction.
Dismissive. He called the concerns childish, said you couldn't fight a war using, I think the quote is, the methods of the Salvation Army, and then he promptly relieved Blaskowitz of his command.
Wow. It just shows how little dissent was tolerated, doesn't it? Especially if it questioned those core ideological goals.
Exactly. The ideology trumped practical military concerns, even then.
Okay, so moving into 1940, the focus shifts west. Germany's sickle-cut plan, Evans describes it, trapping Allied forces in Belgium, leading to the collapse of France. It was astonishingly fast, shocked everyone.
It really did. But then you have Dunkirk. Nearly 340,000 Allied soldiers evacuated. A miracle, it's often called. And Evans points out it was partly helped by Hitler's own controversial order to halt the German tanks.
Against his general's advice, right?
Yeah. Generals like Bock couldn't understand it. Hitler apparently trusted Goering's boast that the Luftwaffe, the Air Force, could finish the job. It gave the Allies a crucial window.
And how did the German public react to these rapid Western victories?
Evans quotes SS reports mentioning boundless admiration and greatest enthusiasm. Even people who were initially skeptical, like that Catholic officer Wilhelm Hosenfeld, who'd been ashamed of what was happening in Poland, admitted he was swept away by the news.
There's a complexity there.
Definitely. Evans also mentions Louise Solmitz, a conservative teacher. She called it a grand day, a huge national turnaround. But she also noted, chillingly, that the shadow cast by this light is becoming ever darker and more threatening, thinking about the persecution of her Jewish husband. That mix of national pride and, well, growing unease.
And this expansion wasn't just military. It was deeply economic. Evans makes a big point about the occupation costs.
Right. Instead of traditional reparations, Germany just billed countries like France huge sums, 20 million Reichsmarks a day from France alone. Far, far more than the actual costs of occupation.
So it's basically just looting on a national scale.
Pretty much. It effectively transferred control of vital French industries, banks, resources straight into German hands. Thinly veiled economic subjugation.
And with this control came, predictably, more anti-Jewish measures.
Immediately. In occupied France, from September 1940, you see Jewish immigration banned. Jewish people and their property had to be registered, the first step towards seizure. Shops marked. This Aryanization, stripping Jews of businesses and livelihoods, moved very fast. By May 41, thousands of Jewish immigrants were already interned in camps.
Okay, then 1941 arrives, and with it, Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union. What really jumps out from Evans's account is Stalin's absolute refusal to believe the intelligence.
It's staggering, isn't it? He had accurate reports, warnings from multiple sources, even a German deserter who came over the day before the attack. Stalin apparently had him shot for spreading false information, just complete denial.
And this war in the East, it was different from the start. It was explicitly ideological.
Absolutely. Evans details how Himmler and Goering talked openly about reducing the Slavic population by millions. The infamous Hunger Plan was part of this, essentially planning to starve Soviet cities, to feed the German armies and maintain food standards back home in Germany.
And the SS task forces, the Einsatzgruppen, followed the army.
Right behind them. Their initial targets included psychiatric hospital patients systematically killed by shooting, poisoning, starvation. Evans notes they then shifted to using mobile gas vans, partly for efficiency, but also because the face-to-face shooting was causing psychological stress among the SS killers themselves, a truly chilling development.
And the propaganda machine kicked into high gear, too.
Oh, yes. After Barbarossa started, Hitler personally told Goebbels to ramp up the media attacks, specifically to unmask the collaboration between Bolshevism and plutocracy, linking communism and Jewish finance, and increasingly expose the Jewish character of this front. The war aim became even more explicitly racial and exterminationist.
But despite the initial rapid advances, the German military started to struggle pretty quickly on the Eastern Front, didn't they?
Immensely. By the end of July 41, just weeks in, 10% of the invasion force was already dead, wounded, or missing. Supply lines were stretched thin. Generals like Halder were writing gloomy entries in their diaries by mid-August, saying things like, "Given the weakness of our forces and the endless spaces, we can never achieve success."
But Hitler wouldn't allow retreats.
No, his infamous stand firm orders, refusing any tactical withdrawals, even when militarily sensible, this caused huge frustration among generals. Heinrici wrote about the army just keeling over into the abyss. You see this constant clash between military reality and Hitler's rigid ideological commands.
And back in the occupied territories in Germany itself, the persecution of Jews was escalating dramatically.
Yes, Jews from other parts of Europe were being shipped into already terribly overcrowded ghettos like Warsaw. Evans describes how new arrivals faced immediate starvation. And by December 41, the first dedicated extermination camp, Chelmno, started operations using gas vans. Tens of thousands murdered there within months.
Did people know what was happening?
Evans argues that knowledge was becoming more widespread than often admitted later. News circulated via soldiers on leave, railway workers who saw the transports. Civil servants read the task force reports. It wasn't a total secret, even if the full horrific scale wasn't grasped by everyone.
So as we move into 1942 and 1943, we're really entering the peak of the genocide and also the mobilization for total war.
Exactly, and you get these chilling confirmations right from the top. Goebbels' diary entry from March 42 describes, quite matter-of-factly, this pretty barbaric procedure of pushing Jews out of the general government to the east, and he adds, not much is left of the Jews themselves. It shows clear intent and knowledge.
Evans provides horrifying details about the mechanics of the killing process, too.
He does, accounts from Treblinka, for instance, describing how carbon monoxide from a diesel engine was piped into chambers, taking over half an hour to kill 40 or 50 men. The sheer horror of overflowing burial pits, the stench leading them to resort to mass cremations using excavators and Jewish prisoner details.
And then there was Operation Harvest Festival.
A truly monstrous event in November 1943, a coordinated, almost military-style operation in the Lublin area. 42,000 Jews murdered in a single day at Majdanek, Travniki, and Poniatowa, often forced to dig their own graves, lie down on top of bodies already there, and then shot. Evans notes dance music was broadcast loudly to drown out the screams and shots.
And Auschwitz, the selections.
Rudolf Höss, the commandant, described it himself. SS doctors doing quick cursory checks. Children, mothers with children, the sick, the old, the weak sent straight to the gas chambers, told they were going for disinfection. Often families had to be forcibly separated.
It's hard to fathom. Were there Germans who were horrified by this?
There were. Evans quotes Wilhelm Hosenfeld again, the officer stationed in Warsaw. He wrote in his diary that a whole people, men, women, children, are simply being slaughtered. This is such a dreadful blood guilt. He even recorded the number 30,000 Jews sent to Treblinka in just 1 week of July 42. So yes, some were aware and appalled, but felt powerless or were too afraid to act.
Evans also touches on the resistance, or lack thereof, in places like the Warsaw Ghetto.
Yeah.
Emanuel Ringelblum's question: why did we allow ourselves to be led like sheep to the slaughter?
It's an anguished question, and Evans explores the complex reasons. Overwhelming terror, certainly. The role of the Jewish police, who were often forced to collaborate. A desperate lack of arms. And also the clinging to hope, often fueled by Nazi deception, the belief they were just being relocated for work. Plus, people were physically weakened by starvation and disease. Organized resistance was incredibly difficult under those conditions.
Then comes Stalingrad, late 42 into early 43. That's seen as a major turning point, isn't it?
Undeniably. German forces trapped, freezing, starving. Evans describes soldiers trying to create a semblance of home in their bunkers. Goering's promise to supply the encircled army by air was a catastrophic failure, delivering maybe a third of what was needed.
And the impact back in Germany.
Huge. Evans says it was widely seen as the beginning of the end. For the first time, you started hearing criticism of Hitler, even if people didn't dare name him directly. Questions like, why didn't he let them surrender? It shook public confidence profoundly.
And this defeat leads to Goebbels' total war speech.
Yes, in February 43, it was partly a bid by Goebbels and Albert Speer, the armaments minister, to seize more control over the home front. But Evans argues it was ultimately pretty ineffective. They faced huge raw material shortages, and there weren't many options left for mobilizing labor, other than exploiting foreign workers even more brutally.
Tell us more about that foreign labor.
It became absolutely essential to the German war economy. By 1943, companies like BMW, Daimler-Benz, Krupp, nearly half their workforce was foreign, often forced laborers or POWs. Conditions, especially for Soviet and later Italian workers, were appalling. Malnutrition was rampant. Evans cites reports of workers getting nothing but water with a couple of turnips, losing significant weight and facing incredibly high death rates. German towns filled with camps for these workers.
And at the same time, the Allied bombing campaign ramps up significantly.
Massively. After the Casablanca Conference in early 43, the British and American air forces coordinate a relentless offensive. The stated aim, progressive destruction and dislocation of the German military, industrial, and economic system, and crucially, undermining civilian morale.
We hear about raids like Cologne, the Dam Buster raid.
Yes, those were significant. But the Hamburg firestorm in July 1943 was on another level. The concentration and type of bombs created literal firestorms. Temperatures hit 800 degrees Celsius. It created winds that sucked the air out of bomb shelters. Asphalt melted, trapping people. Evans quotes horrifying descriptions of corpses like black and shriveled mummies or messes of coagulated human body fat. Utter devastation.
How did German civilians cope with this?
Morale definitely began to crack under the strain. Evans cites reports describing people as totally exhausted and apathetic. Some started openly blaming the regime. There's an incident of a woman shouting at stormtroopers, "The brown cadets are to blame for the war." Jokes mocking Hitler and the party started circulating widely, showing a growing cynicism and loss of faith.
And shortages led to a black market.
Oh, completely. Bartering became, as Evans puts it, a way of life. Shortages were severe for civilians, while soldiers and some foreign workers, like those from Western Europe who received food parcels, had things to trade, creating this complex, often desperate underground economy.
So moving into the final phase, 1944-1945, Germany is clearly losing faith in defeat. What characterizes this period?
Desperation, really, and continued brutality. You see a surge in anger against downed Allied airmen, fueled by Goebbels' propaganda about the bombing. Evans documents hundreds of lynchings by civilians, plus Gestapo executions. It was a small percentage of captured airmen overall, but it shows the raw hatred.
And the Warsaw Uprising in 44?
A pivotal, tragic event. August to October 1944. Himmler orders the city's complete destruction, calling the uprising a blessing to finally solve the Polish problem. But the crucial, cynical element Evans highlights is Stalin. He deliberately halted the Red Army just outside Warsaw, letting the Germans systematically crush the Polish Home Army, which was loyal to the Polish government in exile in London, and thus politically inconvenient for Stalin's post-war plans.
Rosenfeld witnessed this too, didn't he?
Yes, the same officer. He was in Warsaw and wrote about being amazed by the proud bearing of captured Polish women insurgents, singing patriotic songs even as they were led away.
And Hitler himself during this time.
His health was rapidly declining. Evans describes him relying on dozens of pills and injections daily from his physician, Dr. Morell, suffering from heart disease, indigestion, possibly Parkinson's. He became increasingly isolated, paranoid, trusting almost no one, clinging rigidly to his belief in his own genius, even as the Reich crumbled around him.
This leads to the Nero Order, right? The scorched earth policy.
Yes, in March 1945, an order to destroy all infrastructure, military, transport, industrial supply depots, anything that might be useful to the advancing Allies. Pure nihilism.
But Speer tried to stop it.
He did. Albert Speer secretly worked to sabotage the order. Evans details how he went around disposing of explosives, persuading regional leaders and generals that it was insane and impractical. He even cleverly got Hitler to grant him the authority to implement the order, which allowed him to effectively countermand it in many cases, preserving infrastructure for Germany's future.
What about the wonder weapons? Would they ever a realistic hope?
Not really. Hitler and Goebbels clung to the idea that things like the V-2 rockets or the May-262 jet fighter would miraculously turn the tide. But Evans shows that despite German scientific skill, problems like infighting between research teams, critical shortages of fuel and materials, and Hitler's own meddling, like insisting the Me-262 jet fighter be developed as a bomber, doomed these projects. Hitler even dismissed nuclear physics as a Jewish discipline, hindering atomic bomb research. These weapons became a huge drain on resources with almost no strategic impact, a symbol of the regime's detachment from reality.
And the bombing continued relentlessly. Dresden.
February 1945, one of the most controversial and devastating raids. Tens of thousands killed, the historic city center obliterated. Evans notes that Victor Klemperer, a Jewish academic who had miraculously survived the war years in Dresden thanks to his non-Jewish wife, survived this inferno too. A small, almost unbelievable story of survival amidst utter destruction.
What was the mood among ordinary Germans in those final months?
Utter despair mixed with cynicism. Evans quotes a student, Lorwalb, writing in March 45 about the unspeakably bitter situation while the government was still talking about final victory. Belief in Hitler was shattered. People used codenames to talk about the Nazis. Black marketeering and theft were rampant as social order broke down.
And then Hitler's end.
April 30th, 1945, in the Berlin bunker. He married Eva Braun just hours before they both committed suicide. Their bodies were taken outside, doused in petrol, and burned. Soviet investigators later identified the remains mainly through dental records. The absolute end of the Third Reich.
But not the end of the suffering. The Red Army's advance into Germany
Was brutal. Evans doesn't shy away from this. Driven by slogans like fire for fire, blood for blood, Soviet soldiers engaged in widespread looting, burning, and killing of civilians. And tragically, mass sexual violence. Estimates run into the millions for women raped across Eastern Germany, including Berlin. It was horrific, often accompanied by torture, sometimes carried out in front of families.
This led to mass suicides.
Yes, a dramatic spike, especially in areas the Red Army was entering. Evans describes whole good church-going families taking their own lives rather than face the occupation.
What were the feelings in Germany right after the war ended?
A mix, according to Evans. Widespread blame directed at Hitler and the Nazis for the utter devastation. A sense of guilt, particularly regarding the extermination of the Jews, though the full picture took time to emerge for many. Also, a kind of surprise that the Allied occupation forces, including the Soviets after the initial wave of violence, turned out to be less vengeful than Goebbels' frantic propaganda had predicted. Importantly, no large-scale Nazi resistance movement materialized.
And many perpetrators escaped justice, initially at least.
They did. Evans details how notorious figures like Franz Stangl, the commandant of Treblinka, Josef Mengele, Adolf Eichmann, they managed to slip away, often to Latin America, sometimes aided by networks that included figures like Bishop Alo Hodal, based in the Vatican. It took dedicated efforts, like those of Simon Wiesenthal tracking down Stangl decades later, to bring some of them to account. Stangl was eventually sentenced to life for the murder of 900,000 people.
Wow. This deep dive into the Third Reich at war, it really paints a picture of a regime just consumed by this twisted ideology, capable of, yes, incredible military feats early on, but also unimaginable barbarism, and ultimately just collapsing under its own weight, its own hubris, and of course the efforts of its enemies. What really stands out to me listening to this chronological account is that relentless escalation you mentioned.
It really is, isn't it? From that initial lightning war, which was brutal enough, to the full-scale industrialized extermination. And you see how internal party fights, Hitler's personal convictions, often dictated policy, military, civilian even when it seemed to defy all logic or expert advice.
That contrast, too, between the public face, the propaganda, and the horrific reality on the ground, whether in occupied lands or even for Germans at home facing the bombing.
Absolutely. It just reveals how profoundly deep that racial hatred went and how systematically it was applied to dehumanize and destroy millions.
It's incredibly sobering. The narrative forces you to consider the sheer impact of ideology on what people do, individually and collectively. So as we wrap up this deep dive, maybe the question for you, the listener, is this. How do societies get to that point? How do they become so consumed by an ideology that it justifies such widespread violence, such dehumanization? And what lessons can we maybe draw from the internal pressures, the external forces that finally led to its catastrophic end?
And perhaps also think about the role of information and misinformation. And the choices individuals make, even seemingly small ones, when they're confronted with these kinds of overwhelming, often terrifying forces. You know, the diaries Evans uses, people like Hosenfeld or Louis Solmitz, they remind us that even within that monolithic regime, responses varied from horrified condemnation to this really complex mix of patriotism, disillusionment, and despair.
Powerful questions indeed. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the Third Reich at War, 1939-1945, by Sir Richard J. Evans. We hope this exploration gives you a clearer, maybe more nuanced understanding of this absolutely critical period in history. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep digging deeper.